Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I am Ellis Dean, the Director of Digital Programming and Production at Black Doctor, and we have such a special program for you tonight. Before we get started, let's take care of some housekeeping first. So I need you to do a couple things for me. Number one, let us know where you're watching from. We like to know where people are watching us from all over the world. So just drop that in the comments, put your city, state, area code, zip code, whatever you want to put in there. Just let us know where you're watching from. Number two, if you know somebody that needs this information, tag them or share this on your page. We want to get this information out to as many people as possible, and we need you to help us out to do that. So please tag or share this on your page, or do both. How about that? And then finally, if you have any questions, please drop those in the comment section. We want to get as many of your questions asked and answered, because this is all about getting the information that you can use and that you need tonight. So put those questions in the comments, and we'll try to get as many asked and answered in the time allotted. Now, tonight is all about kidney disease, but it's a little bit more than that. Many of you know Black people are disproportionately impacted by kidney disease. There are a few factors contributing to this disparity, including historical treatment of Blacks, of Black people, social determinants of health, distrust, and a number of others. But there's another factor that many do not know about. That is the topic of our discussion tonight. So I hope you stick with us to learn more about what could prove to be life-saving for you or a loved one. Finally, I'd like to add that this show is personal for me. You see, my father is in end-stage renal failure right now and has to go to dialysis multiple times per week. Knowing that family history, combined with what we're going to learn tonight, has me very aware of the role genetics plays in the conditions we face in life. So let's get started. My first guest is Dr. Ogo Egbuna. Let me bring him up here. There we go. So my first guest says Dr. Ogo Egbuna. Dr. Ogo is the Vice President of Clinical Development at Vertex. And next we have Ms. Deja Ivy. Deja is the Associate Director of Community Health and Health Equity at NephCure Kidney International. Dr. Ogo, Deja, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ellis. Good evening, everyone.
So to get this started, Dr. Ogo, I think you have a presentation for us to kind of set the groundwork for what our main topic of discussion is tonight. So we'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. Just want to confirm that you can hear me and that you can see the presentation.
Yeah, that is yes on both.
Okay, great. So thank you, everyone, for your time tonight. I'm particularly honored to be able to talk with everyone today about, as Ellis rightly mentioned, a very important topic in our community, and that's about kidney disease and what recent developments, scientific advancements that have advanced our understanding of kidney disease, especially in the Black community. But before I go into this, I just want to thank Black Doctor for this opportunity to share this information with you all. As he mentioned, I lead the kidney development programs at Vertex, and Vertex is on the leading edge of science in kidney disease that is peculiar to people of African ancestry. Vertex is a science-based biotechnology company that tries to get to the underlying cause of disease and transform the way diseases are taken care of. So with this, again, thank you for the opportunity, and we'll get started. So why the focus on kidney disease? I think Ellis started with a very good example of why on the individual level, it's important, right? When it affects a loved one, you see how it impacts their life, the amount of time that's spent. And here to the left, you can see how there is a disproportional burden of the prevalence of kidney disease in patients of African ancestry compared to all other races. These observations have been documented for well over 100 years. In fact, there are newspapers from the African American community going back to the 1860s talking about kidney disease. And to the left, to the right, you can see these bar graphs that show you, the financial implications. As kidney disease worsens, you see how there's a rather significant increase in the cost of care, both in terms of follow-up medical costs or even just the baseline medical costs. And it's often much higher than this, in the order of hundreds of thousands, when patients end up on dialysis and have complications related to kidney failure. Well, as Alice mentioned, there are a number of reasons why there's this disparity. Some of it is related to socioeconomic reasons, access to care, systems in place that are not fair to the community. But there's one thing that we found: of the many causes of kidney disease, there appears to be a genetic basis for some of this disparity, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And it's related to, by genetics, it's what we inherit from mom and dad, and goes back several thousand years to our ancestors and how they survived certain endemic infections that existed back in West Africa. So who's at risk of developing what we call APOL1 mediated kidney disease? Well, APOL1 is a gene that everybody has, regardless of your race. But for those that lived several thousand years ago in sub-Saharan Africa, human African trypanosomiasis, caused by a certain parasite that's endemic in sub-Saharan Africa, was taking a toll on the population there. And through evolution, the genes, as the parasites became more resistant to the natural defenses against that humans had against the infection, humans also evolved to find ways to overcome these more resistant trypanosoma species. So over time, these APOL1 variants developed several thousand years ago. I would say in the order of 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. But with slave trade and modern day migration, that is within the last 400 to 600 years, people of West African ancestry obviously have moved to various parts of the world, to the United States, to South America, to Europe, to the Caribbean, and they've taken their genes obviously along with them. And it's these variants of the APOL1 gene that were meant to protect against infections that are endemic in West Africa in particular, but in general, sub-Saharan Africa, that now confer a disadvantage of sorts that manifests in the form of kidney disease. And to the left here, it just shows the variants of the normal wild type gene. And you can see here to the left that most people, depending on where the circle is, where your ancestors came from, have the wild type gene in red, right? And then some people have either the G1 variant or the G2 variant, or might have both. Well, to the right, you can see the parasite. The ancestral form of the parasite is called Trypanosoma brucei, and that can be killed by all APOL1, the wild type variant, which to the left is in red. But as I mentioned, these parasites evolved to become sturdier and resistant to the human defenses. And that led to Trypanosoma gambiense, which causes chronic sleeping sickness in West Africa, and Trypanosoma rudensiense, which causes sleeping sickness in East Africa. Well, if you have the G1 variant, it protects against the West African form of sleeping sickness. And if you have the G2 variant, it protects against the East African form of sleeping sickness. And like I mentioned, we inherit these genes from mom and dad. It has nothing to do with your diet or your lifestyle, but it's just a risk. All right. Protective against the parasite if you by chance lived in West Africa, but since you carry it in your genes, even if you no longer live in a place that's endemic for these infections, you've carried along the disadvantage that having those gene variants bring. So let's talk a little bit about who has them, how many people have them, and in general, about 45% of people of African ancestry in the United States and in many other parts of the world actually do not have the variants. They just have the wild type APOL1. About 42% have just one variant, and just having one variant is enough to protect you against sleeping sickness. But about 13% of the population in the US and higher in West Africa, actually, and East Africa, have two variants. So you could you inherit one variant from, if you inherit some genes from mom, some genes from dad, and you inherit your genes in pairs, right? So you might either, if you end up being amongst 13% with two variants, you could either be a G1, G1, a G1, G2, or G1, G2, depending on what you inherit from mom and dad. But the research has estimated that about 70% of people with kidney failure not related to diabetes have that kidney failure related to APOL1 variants. Now, there are many causes of kidney disease or kidney failure: hypertension, diabetes, polycystic kidney disease, which is another genetic disorder but doesn't have any racial predisposition. And importantly, it's estimated that about 4 out of every 10 African Americans with end-stage kidney disease have their kidney disease attributable to the variants, having two variants of the APOL1 gene. How does the APOL1 gene protect against trypanosomiasis? That's important because it's the very same way that the APOL1 variants actually cause kidney damage. The parasite takes up the APOL1 protein that's floating in the blood, and it sort of causes an internal explosion of sorts, just to put it simply, so that the parasite dies. Now, what happens in the kidney is that under certain circumstances, which I'll get to in a moment, the APOL1 variants are activated, and it starts destroying the important filtration units of the kidney. And this graphic gives you an idea of what it means to have two APOL1 variants inherited from mom and dad, and how that compares to those that have none of the variants or just one of the variants. So if you look at the figure to the left, the dark brown or the dark purple line represents those with a certain form of kidney disease called focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, FSGS. And these are people with two APOL1 variants. And then the dotted line, light purple just above that, represents those that have the same FSGS, but only one or no APOL1 variants. And what this shows is that, the kidney function just declines 2 to 3 times faster in those with two variants compared to those that have only one or none. In another form of kidney disease called hypertension-associated kidney disease, it's the same pattern. You can see the darker purple line to the right, to the graph on the right, that shows a much sharper decline in kidney function over time compared to those that have only one or no APOL1 risk variants. And, the alarming thing here is that if you look carefully at these figures, be it the one on the left or the right, half of the people with APOL1 driven kidney disease lose their kidneys within 5 years. So from the time you hear, you start feeling sick or are diagnosed to the time you end up on dialysis or needing a transplant, just 5 years. Some people might, have the progression of their disease a bit longer than that. Some people a bit shorter than 5 years, actually, but about half of them lose their kidneys within 5 years. So I had mentioned that let's spend a moment talking about how the APOL1 gene that's in our DNA that encodes a special protein that circulates in the blood and is expressed in certain tissues like the kidney, like the liver, how it causes APOL1 mediated kidney disease. Like I mentioned, not all individuals with 2 APOL1 variants develop kidney disease. Only about 1 in 5 people. But infectious or inflammatory conditions known as the second hit, the first hit being you having the APOL1 variants, when you have the second hit, be it an infection like COVID or an inflammatory condition like lupus, it increases the expression and the activity of the APOL1 gene. And if you have those variants, you increase the expression of the variants. These variants, like I mentioned, start punching holes in very important cells in the kidney called podocytes. These podocytes are meant to filter the blood and produce the urine. But when the podocytes are damaged, protein and all the other things that are not supposed to go out in the urine start leaking out, and that damages the kidney, in a vicious circle. So there are many people that have 2 variants but do not have kidney disease. But, like I'd mentioned, about 20% of people with these variants, when they have a second hit, be it an infection or inflammatory condition, they really progress quickly. Now, how might APOL1 driven kidney disease present? Well, it could present, as I mentioned, as focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, FSGS, or it might present as hypertension-associated kidney disease, where there doesn't seem to be any other cause, but you just have hypertension. Or it could be due to lupus, where the inflammatory process due to the lupus activates the APOL1 and makes lupus nephritis progress much faster. HIV patients, where there's no inflammation due to the HIV infection, and more recently, COVID. So APOL1 mediated kidney disease is rapidly progressive, and one of the very first signs, and by signs I mean the kinds of things that you would detect in a blood test or a urine test, is that you begin to leak protein for the reasons I had mentioned before, that the podocytes are damaged. It's supposed to hold back those proteins, but it starts leaking into the urine. And then because of the leak of the protein and all the inflammation, there's scarring in the kidney, and that decreases the filtration function of the kidney, progressing all the way to end-stage kidney disease, as I had mentioned, that would require either dialysis or transplantation. Some people, because of complications, might even die from it. So what are the symptoms? I described the signs being high blood pressure, protein in the urine, but the signs are things that you might feel or complain about. A very common, none of it is specific, right? You wouldn't have any of these signs. Some of these signs and symptoms are signs and symptoms you would have if you had heart disease or if you had liver disease. But, just summarize here: tiredness, swelling in the legs, because the kidneys are no longer filtering, fluid the way they should, weight gain, and sometimes a dark or foamy urine caused by the leakage of the protein into the urine. Well, another question is, how would we detect this? How would we know? How would anyone know that they have kidney disease, talk less of it being APOL1 mediated? Well, They're very simple blood tests, not expensive, and could be life-saving, that estimate how well your kidneys are filtering your blood. There's a very simple urine test, again, cheap and could be life-saving, could save you quite a lot in terms of complications related to kidney disease if it's detected early, to check for protein in the urine. As I mentioned, damage to the podocytes leads to leakage into the urine. And then for those that might have APOL1 risk variants, those of African ancestry, genotyping. Again, the genotyping is the result of very recent evidence. In fact, the APOL1 gene has been known for a while, but its relationship to kidney disease was only identified barely a decade ago. It's not routinely done, and there are a number of ways you could ask your doctor for one, but it's not complicated. It could be a saliva test, it could be a blood test, and sometimes your doctor, depending on how severe your kidney disease is, may decide to do a biopsy so that he or she tries to get a better understanding of what's driving or causing the disease. So in conclusion, as I mentioned, there are many causes of kidney disease, and the APOL1 variants emerged in people of recent African ancestry as a survival advantage to overcome parasitic infections, but a survival disadvantage in terms of the risk for kidney disease. Early to middle stages of kidney disease actually may not have any signs or symptoms. And this is a really important point, because you could lose as much as 80-90% of your kidney function before actually even feeling signs or symptoms. The signs or symptoms that I mentioned are not even that specific. So it's important that you catch things early before they get so bad, because the early to middle stages may not even be obvious to you. Simple tests, like I mentioned, could help identify evidence of kidney damage and help you, be more proactive and enable your doctor to implement certain things that might be able to slow down the progression. And then genetic testing can identify genetic causes of disease to help inform the best options for treatment. Your doctor might modify your treatments or may actually refer you for a clinical trial. And I think of all this, it's really important to know your family history and risk for kidney disease, because, like I said, APOL1 this is not the only cause of kidney disease in people of African ancestry, but it's a pretty important one for the reasons I mentioned, and it's inherited from mom and dad. It's not from anything, it's not from drinking, it's not from smoking, it's not from not having enough exercise. It's not anyone's fault. It's just the way we're made up. We're made up of quite a number of amazing things, but like I mentioned, the APOL1 gene was there to protect us against something that was a threat, and but it's come with it as a double-edged sword, and also increases the risk for kidney disease. So I'll stop there, and thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions. I think Deja and I and Ellis would be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fascinating. That was fantastic presentation, Dr. Ogo. I just want to, if you're just joining us, you are here watching with BlackDoctor.org, and we're talking about APOL1 mediated kidney disease, and we're talking about genetic testing or genetic screening, however you want to phrase it, and how it could help you identify if you are a carrier of a specific type of gene that could be exacerbating kidney disease. And so we understand that there are many factors, including hypertension and diabetes, that contribute to kidney disease, but this is something that's coming from mom and dad. So family history is a big thing. The question I have for you, Dr. Ogo, is somebody like me, I've got a direct parent that has end-stage renal failure, how do I know if I'm at risk? That's one risk factor. Should somebody like me, go get screened for APOL1, or are there other factors that come into play?
Yeah. So I think as far as APOL1 mediated kidney disease is concerned, yes, a family history is perhaps all you need to know if you have African ancestry to get genotyped or have the genetic testing. Like I mentioned, it's not complicated. It may not be that readily available, but if you look out for it, you'll find ways, and perhaps Deja, you'll help share the opportunities that might exist out there for genotyping. But it's, for some people it's a saliva test, for some people it's a blood test. I actually got genotyped. I have one of the variants. Some of my family members have two variants, and I tried to genotype my youngest, but he was too young to produce enough saliva, and I didn't want to put him through the needle. So when he ages a little bit, and we might be able to do the saliva test on him.
That's good to know. So you just mentioned some tests. Are there are there other tests to confirm like kidney issues that are out there?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, there are blood and urine tests that tell you, one, the blood test will tell you if your kidney function is reduced, right? Okay. And like I mentioned, you could lose 70, 80, 90% of your function and not feel anything more than, I've been working too hard. The other is the urine test that helps check if there's protein in the urine. APOL1 driven disease, almost all the time is associated with some spilling of protein in the urine because of the way the APOL1 variant protein damages the filtering units of the kidney. So those tests to find out if you have kidney disease, and then the genotyping to find out if APOL1 might be involved in kidney disease is probably the best way to go.
So there was a great question from our audience. You were talking about the dark colored or foamy urine. This is from Deborah, and she's asking a couple of questions. I'm kind of bundling them together. One is, how often should you urinate during the day or night? And what does clear urine mean? If you have dark or foamy urine, that has an implication. Does clear urine have an implication?
Clear is good. That's I'll keep it that simple. Clear urine is good.
Okay.
Now, dark urine, if you don't drink enough fluid, your kidneys will try to concentrate the urine. The kidneys are very smart organs. You drink a lot, you might notice that your urine is almost colorless, right?
Right.
When I mean drink a lot, not alcohol, I mean like water. If you drink a lot of water, your urine becomes clear. If you find out that, like you're working all day and you haven't had time, you might find out that you either don't even feel like urinating, or when you do, because there's some sort of obligatory amount of urine you have to produce every day to get rid of waste, you find out that it's concentrated. That doesn't mean you have kidney disease. But, when you start seeing red or coke-colored urine, or, foaming is one of those classic examples, but, I don't think you should go into a panic the moment you see a few bubbles in your urine. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean you have kidney disease. But again, if you see some bubbles, you have a family history, maybe you have some hypertension, you have any of those symptoms I talked about, okay, maybe it is something to worry about.
Right.
I would add on, to everything that Dr. Ogo was saying, which is all very true. It's kind of the grouping together of some of these issues that can put you at low, moderate, or high risk for kidney disease. And everything that Dr. Ogo mentioned, from familial history, you can have a parent, sibling, even aunts or uncles who have kidney disease that put you at higher risk. Comorbidities like diabetes or hypertension. Race is a factor that we can't control, and we dug into that. And then the hallmark signs and symptoms like protein or blood in the urine, swelling, fatigue, etc. And NephCare, the organization I'm a part of, we actually have a 5-question risk quiz You can go through and select your answers, and then at the end, it tells you whether or not you have low, moderate, or high risk for kidney disease, and then gives you some recommendations as far as a provider or what to do with your lifestyle.
So it sounds like if the symptoms are stacked, so it's not just one symptom by itself, but if you've got a family history and you're of African descent and you've noticed you've got, discolored and or foamy urine, those stacking of the symptoms might be a sign to say, okay, maybe I need to go get some testing, some screening done for just in general, my kidney functioning. Let's start there to make sure your kidneys are functioning at a normal level. And if they're not, then there's an additional, screening that you might want to look at getting done. So start stacking those symptoms. Don't just look at one in isolation and start going to a panic. But if you see multiple symptoms occurring in a short period of time, back to back to back, you might want to go and get your functions checked with that. Was that GSR? Is that what you called it? Is that the test?
Well, GFR is the fancy scientific name for how well the kidney is filtering the blood.
So, and this is a question that's come through in many different ways. How can I help protect my kidneys? Is there something that I can do to help protect my kidneys?
Yeah.
Yes.
So go ahead, Deja.
Okay. I'm trained as a renal dietitian, so I've worked in dialysis centers and then also in some critical care units as the nutrition support for those with kidney disease. And I always go to nutrition as one of the few things that we can, I would say, influence our health with. But it depends on where you're at with your kidney disease, whether or not you have it, and then what stage. So I would definitely say that if you're not diagnosed with kidney disease, you want to do all the traditional things. Drink plenty of water, lean protein, fruits, vegetables, etc. If you have kidney disease and you're in some of the earlier stages, like say maybe stages 1 through 3, you may want to start cutting back on your animal protein. So vegetable or plant-based protein is still okay, but animal protein can be a little bit harder for the kidneys to break down. And you may want to cut back on your sodium or salt. If you are on dialysis, this is stage 4, stage 5, you may want to start watching potassium and your phosphorus, and that's something you can follow up with your dialysis dietitian.
There it is. You laid it out. Okay, so everybody got that. So stages 1, 2, 3. You just have a plant-based diet.
Yeah, on animal protein a little bit. It's going to be a little bit harder on the kidneys, and then the sodium. And then once you get past stage 3, maybe consider potassium or phosphorus modification. But follow up with your dialysis dietitian; she'll guide you and look at your labs.
So, Dr. Ogo, there was another question from the comments that is there any relation to and you mentioned liver? Is there any relation to like fatty liver disease at all with APOL1?
So most of the circulating APOL1 in the body that helps protect against those parasites is actually generated in the liver. But there's been no identified, liver-related disease because of APOL1 or its variants, at least none that we're aware of at the moment.
Okay, all right. So I think so. I mean, there have been some fantastic questions coming in, so I'm gonna mix those in as we're going through this discussion. So, if I'm at risk, if I or a loved one have kidney disease, if I get diagnosed, I go there. I got the symptoms. I saw the symptom stacking. I go see my primary care physician, and they say, "Okay, you've got kidney disease. What's next?"
Well, I think one of the first things that needs to happen is don't panic, and one of the first things you need to do is just arm yourself with information, and ask questions, because you're going to have to be your own strongest advocate, right? Ask questions. And continue to ask those questions until, it's clear in your mind what you need to do. You're going to have to likely talk to a lot of people. You'll need to talk to your doctor, to a nutritionist, perhaps a pharmacist that might help you with medications you might need to take to control anything that is associated with your kidney disease, like if, diabetes might be associated with it, or high blood pressure. Um, and then you just have to be vigilant, you know. If there are things that perhaps you should have been doing in the past, like maybe paying better attention to your diet, exercise, of course, um, it's never too late to pay attention to those, you know. But to me, I think it's not a depending on the stage, it's not necessarily life threatening. And you know, one of the very first things you need to do is just arm yourself with knowledge and information on how to be better. Some of these things, like I mentioned, are not due to any fault of yours. And like I mentioned, we've noticed, especially during the pandemic, um, that COVID really started causing a lot of kidney-related disease because of the inflammation and triggering of an inflammatory response that made the body just think that, oh, I'm under attack by those parasites. You know, so
Deja, I'm gonna throw this.
Deja, do you have any additional advice you'd like to share?
Yes. So you've been told you have kidney disease. What's next? The first thing I would hope your PCP would do is refer you to a nephrologist. Dr. Ogo makes all this seem very easy, but the kidneys are complicated and they have specialized kidney doctors you could speak to. NephCure has a website called Kidney Health Gateway, and you can actually find an expert when it comes to kidney care. So the other thing I would say is that you might want to look into clinical trials and other treatment options. There are always evolutions and discoveries with kidney disease, and you really want to stay on top of cutting edge treatments. So getting involved or volunteering for that is one of the best ways to get access to care. We talked a little bit about social determinants of health and equities around social economic factors, and clinical trials can help bring some equity to that. You know, you get free access to treatments and experts.
So, Deja, I'm gonna throw this question to you. Can you reverse chronic kidney disease?
No, you cannot reverse chronic kidney disease, unfortunately. But I would say that you can manage it with the right treatment and care and hopefully stop the progression.
That was one of the questions from the audience. So, you just mentioned NephCare. What are some of the things that NephCare is doing to raise awareness and reach people talking about kidney disease?
Sure. So one of the things that we're really doing is focusing on health equity. I think most people know by now that people of color have, for a long time, not been actively involved in advances in the medical field and clinical trials, and even just having our voices heard to our experiences in doctors' offices, or even more broadly in healthcare. So we're getting involved with health equity. And some of the ways that we're doing that is having cultural conversations with Black kidney doctors and Black FSGS patients. I know Dr. Ogo mentioned that a little bit earlier. It's a rare form of kidney disease. And then we're also doing things in the community. So we're having monthly health fairs with some community partners and churches, where we're having doctors and nurses talk to people about their kidney risk and things that they can do to protect their kidneys. And then lastly, we're making it a standard to have all of our resources for kidney care translated into Spanish, as well as traditional and simplified Chinese. And we want to continue to expand to other languages as well.
Yeah, if I may just say something about, clinical trials, especially for diseases that have a very high impact in the African American community, there's no way we're going to find out new treatments that would be most beneficial for people of, African ancestry if we do not, carefully consider clinical trials. It's not lost on me that there have been atrocities done in the name of research in the past. And, but that's the reason why I said earlier that if you are told you have kidney disease, one of the first things you need to do, just like perhaps one might do if one is diagnosed with cancer, is read up. Look, get information, arm yourself, right, with information that tells you about all the possible options, right? Talk to people, and if you should consider a trial. There are lots of trials out there. Read up on those trials, read up on the reputation of the doctors involved, on the reputation of the companies involved, and make a decision for yourself. Because like I said, for something like this, unless people of African ancestry sign up for clinical trials for APOL1 kidney disease, for instance, there's no other way to find out what kinds of therapies will work.
We've been talking about genetic screening or genetic testing. Deja, could you help our audience understand what that process is and what it is designed to do? And Dr. Ogo, I want you to help people understand, should everybody just go get screened?
Okay, I'll start off with the process. So genetic screening, you have some options. You can do something as simple as a cheek swab, where a clinician, this could be a nurse or a doctor, will collect your saliva via the cotton swab, and then they would analyze it and allow it to undergo a test where they would be looking at the APOL1 gene. And my understanding is if you have one change to your APOL1 gene, it's not too much of a significant risk with CKD. But if you have two changes or two variants or mutations, some words that we're less comfortable with, but they all mean the same thing, then you have a 30% increase as far as your risk for CKD, and 1 in 8 people of African descent, and that's Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latino, like someone from the Dominican Republic or Brazilian, or if you identify as Black or African American, 1 out of 8 of us have the 2 variants, leading to that higher risk for CKD.
And Ellis, remind me of your question again.
Should everybody get tested?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, not everybody with 2 variants will ever get kidney disease. We don't understand that fully, but we do know that for a lot of people of African ancestry that have kidney disease, there's an enrichment amongst those people for those with 2 variants. Now, because not everyone is going to have kidney disease if you have 2 variants, personally, I don't believe that you need to test unless you have a family history of kidney disease or a personal history of kidney disease. Unless it's just out of plain curiosity, and that's okay too.
Absolutely. So I think from a practical standpoint for our audience, that there are steps, there's things that you should be doing on your own prior to even seeing your health provider. Number 1 is get a family history. Talk to your parents, talk to your siblings, talk to your grandparents if they're still around, talk to anybody in your family, aunts, uncles, whatever, and get a kind of a exhaustive family history of who had what, whether it's cancer, kidney disease, or anything. Get that family history. Number 2, do what you can do. And what do I mean by that? That means eating healthy before you have to eat healthy, right? Because I think a lot of times people start eating healthy after they get diabetes, after they get hypertension, after they start to develop kidney disease. If we do that before, we can kind of slow that process down if it's already begun, or we can stop it from starting altogether if it hasn't begun. So that's something that you have control over right away. So get that family history, start eating healthy before you have to eat healthy, start exercising before you have to exercise. Those are things that you can handle on your own in terms of being your own best health advocate. So when you do, and then the 4th thing you can do is make sure you're getting your regular annual exams and checkups, so you know what your numbers are. There's the numbers you should know across the board. And if you have a family history, you should say, okay, doc, I got a family history of prostate cancer. So what's my PSR? Oh, I've got a family history of kidney disease. What's my GFR? So all of those things, there should be some specific numbers. I got high cholesterol in my family. What's my cholesterol number? So there's some things you should particularly pay attention to, and you could only do that if you're getting your annual screenings done. So those things you could control. Then when you go into your doctor, and your doctor comes back and if they have a poor report, then they will refer you to a nephrologist and do your follow up, right? Follow your treatment plan. If Deja gives you a nutrition plan and you don't follow it, it's not Deja's fault. It's her fault. You've got to take control and be your own best health advocate by controlling what you control. I'm sorry, I just got up a soapbox right quick, but that's really just, you know.
Well said. Overview.
Well said.
It's a two-way street. So Doc, what are some of the things that Vertex is doing to help in this process of addressing rare diseases?
So, as I mentioned earlier, Vertex, that's what Vertex focuses on: severe diseases with a high unmet need. No effective treatments. And APOL1 driven kidney disease happens to be one of those diseases that Vertex is working on. And right now we're actually in phase 3 trials, testing an oral pill of a medication that inhibits this excessive activity of the APOL1 variants in those with kidney disease and APOL1 variants. So it's an ongoing trial now. As part of it, you can get genotyped, and it's only if you meet a whole set of criteria that is that makes it worthwhile for you to go into the trial would you even get into the trial. So not everybody can qualify for it, but we just started the trial, and we're cautiously proceeding to make sure that we find out not only whether it works, but how safe it is.
Well, that is fantastic. And so if you're interested in any type of trial for any condition, start with your primary care physician. You can ask them about it. If they don't know, they should research it. And you can also go to, I think it's clinicaltrials.gov. And there's a listing of all ongoing clinical trials available there on that website. So there's ways to find out about clinical trials, but I would say talk to your primary care physician and ask them, especially if you have an existing condition or at risk for a condition, because some trials are just designed for people that are at risk, and see if they can lower that risk or if they can start that. So just ask your primary care physician, and they should be able to give you some information about that. And when I talked about it in my lead, and then you mentioned it in your presentation, Dr. Ogo. Can you kind of talk more about the disparities between blacks and whites as it comes to end stage renal disease? Like I told you, my father is in it. He's been on dialysis for a number of years, goes 3 times a week and you're absolutely right. It's several hours a day. Like today, he went at 10 o'clock this morning and wasn't done until 2:30. So that's a significant part of his day that has to, and what dialysis is, for those that don't know, it does what your kidneys are supposed to do. It cleans your blood, it filters your blood. And so think about all that has to happen, and then what your kidneys are doing ongoing. Dialysis can only do that, in spurts at a time. So that's why you have to sit there for hours and clean your body out, and then toxins build back up, and you got to go back and do it again. So you don't want to get to that point, but talk to us more about some of the disparities between blacks and whites when it comes to end stage.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, for the longest time, over 100 years now, there are insurance reports from the 1920s actually that show that there's a difference in hypertension and kidney disease between black patients and non-black patients. And the causes over the years, have been identified to be both social and economic. Access to care, access to primary care, to preventive care, because like I mentioned, not all kidney disease, for instance, is due to APOL1. But there's still disparity, even amongst those that do not have APOL1 variants. And, access to care is certainly one of them. Access to healthy nutrition is another. Education, access to education, all these things they're really complicated, but they're connected, because a smarter person is eventually a healthier person,
Mhm.
you know. So it's probably something that we could spend the next several hours talking about. And I'm not so much of an expert, but I've tried to, summarize decades of research and work looking into this, that even when you correct for income, there's still a difference
Mhm.
because of some other disparity that has, influenced the way healthcare is received, or, by the patient, or even access in the first place.
Right.
So I think that in a nutshell, so those are the things that, we do have control over, and that's why we talk about it to see how we can improve those determinants. But again, there's some determinants of this disparity in kidney disease that it's it's what you inherit from mom and dad.
And some of that's a little bit disappointing. you know,
Yes.
I wanted to hear it like good looks and athleticism.
Well, just to make it clear, we we're beautifully and wonderfully made, and
Right.
we all inherit, a whole bunch of good things that I'm sure we all appreciate from our forebears.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Absolutely.
uh, some things just come with baggage.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion here talking about APOL1. So when we're talking about kidney disease, diabetes comes up, hypertension comes up, even that little adrenal gland that sits on the top, and that's more associated with hypertension. But all of these things, but we rarely talk about our genetics. And the beautiful thing that what they're doing and the work that they're doing at Vertex is really doing these studies and finding that APO1 gene has an influence and an impact on people of African descent with regards to the development of kidney disease. And so, from what we've learned tonight, it can accelerate the process of kidney disease. So it can make it go faster. It can start on just by inflammation. It's like striking a match, and it goes, and everything it jumps off. And so, we have to be knowledgeable about our own health conditions. We cannot just walk around blindly about a health this condition, so we won't be blindsided if something does come up. So as we're wrapping up, we're going to give you a chance to give your final statements. The question is, what's the one thing, what's the few things you want people to walk away from having watched this program tonight? Deja, we'll start with you.
Well, being a part of a patient advocacy organization, I would start off by saying advocate for yourself and ask very intentional questions with your doctor. How are my kidneys? Can I have kidney labs? What do these results mean? I think the more specific you are, the better guided you will be by your provider.
Yeah, and if there's one thing I'll say, and I know that many people sometimes are intimidated by their doctor, or they're shy, or they just don't know how to break the ice and start a conversation about testing for kidney function, or kidney disease in the first place, or even genetic testing. Again, you are your own best advocate, and it could be as simple as, what, I'm really worried about. You could just tell your doctor, I'm really worried about, I heard that a family member had kidney disease, and I heard that it can run in families. Doc, can you test me for kidney disease? Or I heard that kidney, not only is kidney disease driven by things like diabetes and hypertension, but it could be due to genetic factors. Is that, and that I've heard about the APOL1 gene, for instance. Should I be tested about, for that? Or can you test me for that? You have to be bold. I know that sometimes doctors can be a pain in the butt, but you have to be bold. It's your life you're talking about, and certain conversations could really make a difference. So just be bold, ask the questions, break the ice, overcome your fear or shyness, and just ask the question.
Well, thank you. And that is a wonderful messaging. Be bold, right? Ask those questions, as Deja asked, pointed and deep questions, and be bold in asking those questions, because you're right. This is your health. This is your life. And you are the only person that has the most control over your health outcomes. So I want to thank Dr. Ogo and Deja for joining us this evening. I want to thank our partners at Vertex for helping us put together this wonderful program to give you some more information about that could help protect your kidneys and give you some life-saving and life-changing information. If you want to follow up, we're going to have some articles about APO1 on blackdoctor.org, so you can get more information there. Deja, give me the website again that people can go to get more information.
nephcure.org. So neph, like nephrology, NEPH, and then cure, CURE.org.
Okay, we'll put that on the screen here, ph.org. So this is the organization. They're dedicated to information about your kidneys. So go there and learn as much as you can. Again, start with yourself, start at home. The things that you can control those. And the more things that you have greater control over, the more influence you'll have as you expand out. So thank you again. So Doc, there was some questions about kidney stones. I know we weren't talking about kidney stones, but I'm trying to help the people that are watching. Kidney stones. If somebody has chronic recurring kidney stones, what should they do?
Well, in the 30 seconds I have left,
yes,
that's a tall order. But again, you are what you eat. Sometimes I know you are what you inherit from mom and dad, but sometimes you are really what you eat. There might have to be a modification of diet. There may have to be, and especially if there are complications, you might need to see a urologist. But the simplest thing, and maybe even the hardest thing, is taking enough water to keep, so that, because what happens when you have stones is that the urine becomes so concentrated with the materials that form stones that they form stones. So you need to dilute the concentration of the urine by drinking a lot of water. Easier said than done, but I can't count the number of times people fall short of taking enough. You usually have to take quite a bit, I have to admit, but that's one of the things. And sometimes it's either because there might be a genetic factor or some other thing, and especially if it's complicated with infection, you may need to have surgical treatment to deal with the stones. So it wasn't exactly the topic of today's conversation, and this is not meant to be medical advice per se, but I'm just talking generally. There are so many things that you may have to consider, but if there's just one thing you do, is you have to take a lot of water.
There you go. Thank you for that. I hope the person that's still watching that kept asking that question. I appreciate you stepping in and coming off track and answer that question for them. So, but please, I'm going to put this here on screen for everybody. Everything that we talked about this evening, including that last piece about kidney stones, is informational purposes only, should not be relied upon as medical advice. Please, is not going to replace what you are talking to your physician, who your primary care provider about. So always consult with them regarding anything about your personal health. But this is a great place to start, and this can generate some conversations that you have with your primary care provider. Again, I want to say thank you all for joining us again this evening, and we will see y'all next time.